Hi, I'm Christina Stagman, and I'm going to be talking about the daycare dilemma. And while this isn't a topic that is relevant to my work because I don't work with children, I was pretty interested in it because I have two children, and the debate about daycare has definitely happened between my husband and myself. So I'm going to provide just a little bit of background information and then, according to the research, what some of the advantages of daycare are, as well as some of the disadvantages and Adler's possible view. So, increases in the number of working mothers has led to an increase in demand for non parental care, including child care centers, daycare, nannies. And this is a big shift from where things were at 50 years ago. And now, about 60% of U.S. children under the age of 5 spend time in daycare regularly. And that amounts to about 12 million children. So, a lot of kids are going to daycare. And women are now almost as likely to be working when they have an infant as they are when they have a preschooler. And going back to Bowlby's attachment theory in the 70s, much of the research about daycare has been focused on attachment and worries about how a child's well-being and their physical health is affected by daycare. A lot of the research about daycare comes from the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, or NICHD study. That was a big longitudinal study that followed over 1,000 kids in the US from over 10 sites since their birth in 1991, and they're still gathering research. So, according to that research, the majority of infants who experience non-maternal care regularly still form secure attachments. And if you remember going back to attachment theory, those babies with secure attachments are the ones who show distress when their mothers left in a strange situation test, and then they sought their mother's comfort. And once they were soothed and reassured by their mothers, they went on exploring and playing. So, also, some research suggests that employed mothers might actually be more positive in their caregiving, and that employed mothers are as likely as non employed mothers to be attentive and to provide sensitive care to their babies. And that comes from the class text. Also, according to the book in our class, for those living in poverty, infant child care was associated with better cognitive and language outcomes by age 3 compared to kids who were in full-time maternal care. There was also a large Canadian study, and they found that infant daycare was associated with fewer internalizing and externalizing problems, as well as more social competence for children if they came from high-risk families. And so those high-risk families were ones who had one or more of the following factors: poverty, poor education, high stress or conflict in the family, single parenthood, young and inexperienced mothers, or parental psychopathology. Now, on the other hand, according to that same NICHD study, there are definitely some disadvantages of daycare, including the fact that longer hours in daycare during the first 6 months of a baby's life may pose some risk. Those babies were found to have more behavior problems by the age of 2, as well as lower maternal sensitivity and less positive interactions with their mothers at age 3. But we have to keep in mind that child and family characteristics are more important than just daycare alone. Also, the number of daycare settings matters. They found that children who had been in many settings showed more problem behaviors at age 2. Also, children's attachment was less secure when they had early child care for more than 10 hours a week, and if they had mothers who were rated low on sensitivity. So, according to our text and some of that NICHD research, the more time children spend in non-maternal care, especially center-based care, the more aggressive and oppositional they tend to be by kindergarten age, which is pretty significant. Also, children with more difficult temperaments were more likely to show increased behavior problems over time. So this kind of led me to think more about the diathesis stress model and differential susceptibility. There was part of the research that I found really interesting about the negative impact on daycare on the body's stress regulation mechanisms. So they found that many children showed increased stress levels when they were in daycare during the course of a day, and that was measured by cortisol. And when these same kids were tested at home, their cortisol levels actually declined over the day. And then toddlers who were between ages 1 to 3 showed the biggest increase, suggesting that childcare may be especially stressful for this age. This research also found elevated stress levels can lead to reduced immune response, which we've all been aware of according to all the research that's come out. And the children whose stress levels were affected by daycare were even more likely to get sick. I mean, we know that kids in daycare get sick because they're confronted with germs and all kinds of nasty stuff all day long. But kids are even more likely to get sick when they have high stress levels. And if they're having high stress levels in daycare, that's pretty hard for those poor little kids, I would think. They also found that longer hours in daycare was associated with atypical cortisol levels even at age 15. So these stress hormones, the cortisol levels, are having a significant impact on the children if by the age of 15 they still have some atypical levels. We're seeing that the stress is following the kids throughout their lives, which is kind of scary to me. There was another study in the UK that found children who have experienced any form of non-parental childcare are more likely to have slightly increased attention and hyperactivity problems. And they found that children who spent longer amounts of time in non-parental childcare may experience higher levels of attention or hyperactivity problems even in adolescence. And this was significant research because it was the first study to show this association as far along as adolescence. So that study in 2012 in the UK found that younger age of starting non-parental childcare and full-time non-parental childcare didn't pose an additional risk, which is interesting. So out of all of this big, huge NICHD study, basically what they found is that there's a dose-response relationship between early age, particularly before age 6 months of life, more extensive or more hours during the week spent in daycare, and cumulative time or how many years kids are spending in daycare. And that is associated with higher rates of aggression, noncompliance, and neediness at school age. Also, the overall effect of childcare depends on the quality of that care. One of the flaws with the research is that they're not measuring what quality childcare is, and they're lumping together all of these different types of daycares. So some of them are really great. We have like early childhood and family education classes and daycare there where they're geared at learning and teaching kids developmental skills. But a lot of daycare could be just a nanny, some lady down the street. There's no good measurements for these daycares. But we know that low quality care puts children at a disadvantage in terms of their cognitive and language development versus the opposite for high quality care. And supposedly they found that 85 to 90% of out-of-home childcare in the US is less than high quality. That's also really scary, I think. There are a lot of things we still don't know, even though we've been studying daycare for quite a while now. We don't know why boys are affected more than girls negatively by daycare. We also haven't found how to modify childcare to better meet the needs of boys. And a lot about the quality of childcare offered in most childcare settings is unknown, like I was just mentioning. There's also a paradox that exists. So one way of improving the home environment is to reduce stress for mothers and improve their mental health. Things like low or free cost out-of-home daycare could be a way to reduce that stress, but that results in more group time and more daycare time. So, how much out-of-time care is enough to give stressed mothers a needed break, while not so much to raise the risk of future behavioral and emotional problems? I think that's kind of a $1,000,000 question. Moving on to what Adler would say, I think in this debate, Adler might see that social interest could be developed in quality daycare if the providers are really educated and know about childhood development and they're able to help children feel valued and to feel competent and empowered. That could be a good thing. And we also could see with quality daycare some of that scaffolding that Vygotsky believed in to help language development if the providers are quality and, like I said, educated to help children develop their language. On the other hand, I think Adler might view some daycare, like poor quality daycare, leading to problems for the child, like inferiority feelings. If the child's not getting enough attention, if they're not getting the proper modeling and feedback, if they're not getting good social interactions with both their peers and the providers there, that could be problematic. Also, on the opposite end of inferiority feelings, they might develop a superiority complex. I think that could be shown with some of the research about how kids are more aggressive depending on more hours they spend in daycare. So the kids that bully others or engage in other aggressive behavior, I think Adler might view that as some results from daycare. Also, sensitive and responsive parenting is still vital regardless of if a kid is in daycare or not, because we know that the way of responding to parenting is kind of a child's first prototype of their worldview, and then they develop their worldview throughout their life based on some of their initial interactions. We also could see that overprotection can create dependent children. So if a child is at home with a stay-at-home mom and that mom is really overprotective, that's going to be problematic. Whereas the child might be able to better explore if they're in a quality daycare. But there are questions about if daycare providers really understand the child's goal and if they respond appropriately or effectively. Some of those goals, and like Draker's mistaken goals of behavior, are good for providers to know, and we would hope that daycare providers are educated in child development, but a lot of them aren't. Anyway, in conclusion, each child is unique and needs to be viewed holistically, I think Adler would say. So there's not a right or wrong answer about if daycare is good or bad. It definitely has its pros and cons, and the child's learning environment at home plays a big role, as well as their daycare. So that is my presentation. Thank you for watching.